Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 3, our third episode of Forgotten Threads. Now, I just want to kind of forewarn you before I get started with this episode. I am going to be reading a lot of what I'm going to be telling you because I do not want to get any of the facts incorrect. I don't want to get any of the quotes or statements wrong. So hang with me, enjoy the photos. I've got a little bit of animation that I've been working on, and I've thrown it somewhere, I don't know, in the next couple of minutes. So I hope you enjoy that. Give me some feedback and let me know what you think. And if you think it's cool or if it's kind of weird. We have had 2 videos so far, and some of what we're going to be covering today will incorporate some of those things that we've already learned about. For instance, the Florida land boom and how important that was to Florida, and how the end of it spelled a new kind of depression, a new and very difficult time for Florida. So hang with me. This is Forgotten Threads. I'm Beth Perdue. I'm your storyteller for today, and let's get started. By the time the calendar turned to 1933, Florida had already been worn thin. The state had not entered the Great Depression with the rest of the country in October 1929. It had, in fact, stumbled into hardship earlier with the collapse of the 1920s land boom. Around 1926 and a pair of devastating hurricanes in 26 and 28. By the time the stock market crashed, Florida was already bleeding. A Mediterranean fruit fly infestation in 1929 wiped out much of the citrus crop, and the state imposed border checkpoints to turn away migrants who could not prove they had work or money to support themselves. Nationally, unemployment hit roughly 25% by 1933, and Florida felt every point of it. Tourism, the state's lifeline, persisted only as a trickle of winter visitors driving south for warmth. By 1933 itself would become one of the most consequential single years in Florida's modern history. A year that opened with an assassin's bullet in Miami, weathered the most violent Atlantic hurricane season on record up to that point, and closed with a state slowly reawakening under the first programs of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. And somewhere in all of this, Josie Powers was writing a postcard back to her friend on this postcard. I love these. These are such amazing glimpses back in time to things that no longer exist. And in this case, the Pensacola Bay Bridge, the original one. It was the first 3-mile bridge opened in 1931 and was a narrow toll bridge connecting Pensacola to Gulf Breeze. After a replacement bridge opened in the 1960s, parts of the original became a fishing pier. Much of it was destroyed by Hurricane Ivan in 2004. People who grew up in the area often remember fishing from the remains of the old bridge. Josie was writing to Miss Sarah Stoker in Truro, Massachusetts, and this is what she says. Dear Sarah, I wonder if you feel any colder than I do this morning. The coolest snap ever known here. Warmer today, they say. I hope so. No sunshine today. Sorry to hear Miss Holsby had a fall. Hope she will soon recover. How is your cold? I have crossed this bridge twice this last week. Lovely on sunny days. Well, let's look a little bit further. See what's going on in the couple of years that are leading up to 1933 when this postcard was mailed, and find out, what we can learn. When the boom collapsed in 1926, fortunes evaporated overnight. The Great Miami Hurricane that September flattened a city already on financial life support, and the 1928 Okeechobee Hurricane killed an estimated 2,500 people in the agricultural communities around the lake. By 1929, when the rest of the country began its descent, Florida was already 3 years into its own private depression. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Well, he arrived in Jacksonville on February 4th, 1933 by train. He met the newly inaugurated Governor, David Schultz, before boarding the yacht Narmahal. It was meant to be his last vacation as president-elect. He would take office on March 4th. On the evening of February 15th, Roosevelt addressed a crowd of roughly 25,000 people from the back seat of an open green Buick convertible parked at Bayfront Park in Miami. Standing on a nearby bench was a 32-year-old unemployed bricklayer named Giuseppe Zangara. He was 5 feet tall, an immigrant who was tormented by constant chronic abdominal pain and a deep anti-capitalistic rage. He pulled a revolver and fired 5 shots, shouting, "Too many people are starving!" His aim was spoiled, however, at the last moment by Mrs. W.F. or Lillian Cross, the 100-pound wife of a Miami physician who seized his pistol arm and twisted it upward. Speaking to a reporter the next morning, she described the moment in her own words. My mind grasped the situation in a flash. I said to myself, he's going to kill the president. I caught him by the arm and twisted it up. The shots made a terrific noise in my ear. He kept shooting and trying to force my arm down, but I wouldn't let go. I couldn't have held much longer, however, when Mr. Armour seized him. None of the bullets struck Roosevelt. 5 bystanders were hit, including Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak, who was standing on the running board of the car. Cermak died on March 6, 1933, 2 days after Roosevelt's inauguration. But this really brought up a perplexing and interesting thing. I found it interesting that the Chicago mayor, during this particular time, would be standing beside the president during his trip through Miami. And what do we know about the attempted assassin? So let's look a little bit deeper into this, see the reasons why Cermak was there, and also what ideology or political leanings the assassin had that could potentially have led to the president being the intended target and not necessarily Cermak. But let's look at both sides. Anton Cermak, 44th mayor of Chicago, had deep entanglements with Chicago's organized crime world by 1932, but not as a member or ally of Al Capone's outfit. He was its political enemy, allied with rival gangsters who answered to him personally. And he was in Miami in February 1933 because he urgently needed to repair his relationship with the incoming Roosevelt administration after backing the wrong candidate at the 1932 Democratic National Convention. Cermak was not a maid, mob figure, or a traditional machine boss collecting envelopes and, all of that stuff that we see on TV. He was a sitting mayor running his own parallel criminal organization in direct competition with the Capone outfit, who just 5 years earlier in 1928 had purchased a mansion at 93 Palm Avenue on Palm Island in Miami. After Al Capone was sent to federal prison on tax evasion in 1931, the Chicago outfit passed on to Frank Nitti, the enforcer. Cermak, newly elected mayor that same year, saw an opening. He allied himself with a lifelong gangster named Teddy Newberry, formerly of the Bugs Moran organization and then the Capone organization. The plan, according to multiple sources citing later court testimony, was to use city police muscle to break what was left of the Capone syndicate and replace it with gangsters that were loyal to City Hall. This part of the story is pretty straightforward. It is not disputed. There has been so much writing about it that really there's not much to dispute. Cermak had a serious political problem with the incoming president, however, and it was one of his own making. Cermak traveled to Miami on the 7th of February to have a meeting to discuss who was going to be appointed to Roosevelt's government. Cermak did not want a job for himself, but was keen to get some of his followers to have good jobs. He also wanted to make sure Chicago got a share of Roosevelt's promised New Deal. Negotiations with James Farley went well, and it was arranged that Roosevelt would meet with Cermak on the 15th of February at Bayfront Park. James Farley, Roosevelt's political fixer and the man who would shortly become Postmaster General and the chief architect of Democratic patronage, brokered the reconciliation. The Bayfront Park rally on February 15th was meant to be the public capstone of that reconciliation, a chance for Cermak to be seen at the new president's side as Chicago patched things up with Washington. It was in that limited sense a success. According to one eyewitness account from Chicago Alderman James Bowler, who had come down with the mayor. Mayor Cermak and I had gone to the park 20 minutes before the president-elect was due to arrive, and we sat in the band shell together. When Mr. Roosevelt's car came along, the president-elect saw the mayor and called to him to come down. Mr. Cermak called back that he would wait until after Mr. Roosevelt had made his speech. Cermak walked down to greet Roosevelt after the brief speech. He was standing on the running board of the open Buick, shaking the president-elect's hand when Zangara fired. The conspiracy theories live on. They are, was he intended to shoot Cermak and the assassination attempt of the president was just a ruse? Or was the intended target actually the president? Most historians treat it as an attempted assassination of FDR, while theorists say it may have been Cermak who was the intended target the whole time. Zangara was born in southern Italy in 1900 into extreme poverty, like many people. The world was a mess, and Italy was heading quickly toward fascism. Zangara was asked by his uncle to come to America. Unfortunately, he walked right into the front door of a country headed to a depression. His ideology was pretty much already set when he came as a 23-year-old. He was out of a job by 1933 and had some sort of constant stomach pain. We don't have any idea what. Bad ideology paired with constant physical pain is an explosion waiting to happen, and that is exactly what happened. After he was arrested, he reportedly told the police, "I like Roosevelt all right, but I don't like presidents." He also said in prison, "I have a gun in my hand, I kill kings and presidents first and next all capitalists." Unfortunately, his integration into America's capitalistic society during a time when the mob was on the rise, a depression was raging, and a World War II was looming in the very near distance, well, that integration had failed. This was not the only tragic thing that happened that year. There were multiple hurricanes. In fact, the 1933 Atlantic season remains by accumulated cyclone energy the most intense ever recorded, with 20 named storms and 11 hurricanes. Some of the devastation that came from these hurricanes, both the Florida-Mexico hurricane and then later on the Treasure Coast hurricane, was mind-blowing. Check out some of these images, just catastrophic. But like every bad season, there is also good that comes. We don't want to forget about this postcard, and we certainly don't want to forget about Miss Sarah Stoker or Josie Powers that was sending that postcard. The good things that happened in a year that was filled full of bad. Few figures embody 1933 in Florida more completely than Zora Hurston. Born in Alabama and raised in Eatonville, the first incorporated all-black town in the United States. In fact, I did a short for TikTok for this and for Eatonville, and it was really fascinating, that study into the town. So look below. I'm going to put the link to that short little TikTok video below, and hop over there and take a look if you'd like to learn more about this. Florida in 1933 was a state holding its breath. It had survived an assassin's bullet aimed at the next president, the most violent hurricane season in living memory, and the fourth year of a depression that had begun for Floridians even earlier than for the rest of the country. Yet the first New Deal programs were arriving. Zora Hurston was writing her first novel. Miami Beach was beginning to rise in pastel and neon, that fantastic look of the 1930s. Swing music was beginning to fill the airwaves. Somewhere along this line, Josie Powers was driving down, maybe for the second time, down that wonderful bridge on a sunny day. It was a forgotten thread in the larger fabric of American history. A year of survival, endurance, and the quiet beginning of a long recovery. The Florida that would emerge by the end of the decade, modern, mobile, increasingly suburban, was being woven almost invisibly in the difficult months of 1933. So what in the world can we learn from this little postcard, this little forgotten voice? Let's take a look. Well, if we first look at the post stamp, the canceled stamp, it says February 10th, 1933. Now, this was just 5 days before that assassination attempt. What's interesting is temperature. She mentions both hot and cold, or warm and cold, within the first sentence or so of this little postcard. She wrote of the cold and said it was the coldest snap ever, proving how short our memories are. The coldest recorded temperature in that area actually happened 30 years prior, little over 30 years prior, in 1899, and reached a frigid 7 degrees. But then she says, warmer today, they say, proving that for every cold and desperate situation, there is in fact a sunny side. Florida is truly as wild as a flip of a coin. It can be 80 degrees one day and 50 degrees the next day. Memories fade, and then the next bad or difficult thing seems to be the absolute worst thing to happen again. And truly, there is always something worse. But just like Josie said, twice in fact in her postcard, first it's warmer today, and then later she adds the view on the bridge is just lovely on sunny days. We learn that perspective is not always factual. And we shouldn't base truth on it. But it is important to how we view our world around us. And then we need to determine our attitude towards those things. Sounds like Josie could see the other side of things. She could see the warmth, she could see the beautiful creation that was out there. But she also talked about the cold, and 1933 was very much that way. It was a time in our world where everything was changing. Aside from the obvious things that were happening around the world in 1933, Florida was coming into its own little depression of sorts, but it was also coming out of it. And so we see the cold in that early part of the year, the devastation, the assassination attempt, later on, all of the hurricanes that came through. But the year was closing out with some pretty amazing things that were beginning to happen. Yes, World War II was on the horizon and the world was gearing up towards that. But coming out of this depression, America was coming into its own. So, my name is Beth Purdue, and this has been Forgotten Threads.